Chapter 6. From manager to broadcast journalist. Just like a pretty girl doesn't like other pretty girls, Andre the Giant didn't like big wrestlers. I remember when Manute Bol, a basketball player from Nigeria who was taller than Andre, would come to the Capitol Center in Washington. Andre would never go out and meet him because of something Vince McMahon Sr. told him. Vince said not to let anyone see Andre with someone who is bigger than he is. Andre had to be the biggest man in the world. John Studd wanted to be the biggest guy in the business, but he couldn't because of Andre. When Andre would work with Studd, he would really bump him around. Studd couldn't take bumps because of his size. He would get in the ring with Andre and get pulverized, even losing some hair and getting some teeth loosened. Andre wanted Studd to stay on him and beat him down, and John simply didn't want to make him mad. On television, Studd would say he was the real giant, and I think Andre believed some of his interviews. I wasn't aware that the WWF was going to turn Andre heel in 1987. He walked up to me one day and said, "We're going to have some fun, boss." I was confused because I wasn't managing him at the time. A few days later, Vince approached me and said, "Andre would like you to be his manager." That was quite an honor. No one had ever managed him before, and he never wanted to be associated with anybody else. Andre always talked for himself. I think he just felt I was over and he could trust me. It was Andre's idea to pass the torch to Hulk Hogan and to have the match at WrestleMania 3. The finish was clear. Hogan would make a comeback, slam Andre, and pin him. But you have to know that once you got your hands between Andre's legs and lifted him up, if he wanted to go forward, you couldn't stop him. He could hold you down and tell that referee, "Count." That referee would count. I would have even run in the ring and counted. I don't think Hogan ever wanted to work with Andre because I don't think he trusted Andre. Trust is very important in the ring. And when Andre wanted something, he took it. Baron von Raschke once explained to me why Andre had bad teeth and even worse breath. Do you know what that's from? Eating handfuls of villagers. Andre was a natural heel because he grew to hate people. Fans would walk up to him and ask questions like, "How tall are you? How much do you weigh? And are you Andre the Giant?" No, he was Willie Shoemaker. Who do you think he was? He turned babyface at WrestleMania 6 when he lost the tag team title he held with Haku. After the match, he was supposed to attack me and slap me around. I saw that big paw coming down, but I moved to the left. I thought he was going right to left, but he missed me. His hand moved back to the left, and I was moving my face to the right, and he connected. He was paintbrushing the hell out of me, and I couldn't tell him to stop. It was like driving a golf ball in a bathroom. I didn't know where he was coming from. But turning back to a babyface didn't change how he felt about the people. While I would have memberships to all the airline clubs so I could go into the lounges and not be bothered, Andre wanted to sit in the hall. But everybody would bother him, and in turn he would swear at them. I'd ask Andre to come into the lounge with me, but he refused. Again, it was something Vince McMahon Sr. told him years ago. Everyone must see him, and he must be out in public. Andre became bigger than life, and he hated it. Andre did have an escape. He had a favorite French restaurant in Connecticut. The food was just like his mom used to cook. He could sit there in quiet and nobody bothered him. They served liver, tongues, lips, and lungs. I used to call the place the Autopsy Grill. They had an old guy at the grill named Charlie who played the piano. I told him once, "One of these days, you're going to be on the menu here." Before his WWF career, Andre would travel the country, wrestling in many territories. That time there were at least 30 in the United States and Canada. Everyone who worked with Andre referred to him as boss. Why boss? Think of the old question of where a bear sleeps. Anywhere he wants to. Replace bear with boss, and that summed up Andre. He even held the Live with Regis and Kathy Lee show hostage. Regis wanted to go to commercial, and Andre kept threatening Regis, yelling, "No." Andre hated to wrestle in the AWA. Vern Gagne always booked him to wrestle twice, a match on the card and the Battle Royal. Andre thought he was a special attraction and should wrestle only once. He would have said something about it, but he was usually booked higher up on the card with an opponent that would draw. Even though he hated doing it, Andre worked twice for the good of the promotion. But when he would work the singles match, he'd wrestle only a couple of minutes. And although he won most of the Battle Royals, there were times when he would just throw himself out of the ring if he was in a bad mood. However, not before backing up 6 wrestlers in the turnbuckle with his rear end and executing a unique, lethal, and very common finishing move for him, passing gas that sounded more like thunder. Non-wrestlers were not immune to Andre's finisher. He would do it in elevators with a bunch of old women in there. He'd scowl at them and yell, "Quit it." Andre's mood would depend on the town. We were in Rapid City, South Dakota, with the AWA, and he clearly didn't want to be there. He got in the ring, obviously tanked, looked at everybody, and again eliminated himself from the battle royal. A few days later, I was serving as the agent backstage when Vern Gagne walked up to me and said, "I hear Andre is finishing his matches too early." I said, "Well, that's Andre." He said, "You keep him in there." I said, "Vern, if I had a Thompson submachine gun, I couldn't keep him in there. When man goes home, he goes home. Good night, Mr. Gagne." I bumped into Andre once at O'Hare Airport. I hadn't seen him in about 10 years. This big paw grabbed me by the shoulder. I turned around, and there he was with his plaid suit and big hair. "Boss, how have you been?" I asked. "You have drink with me?" Andre demanded. "I can't. I've got to catch a plane to Omaha. I've only got 10 minutes. He wouldn't let go. "No, you have drink with me." "No, I have to go, please." "Well, good to see you." Andre left, and I walked about 10 more steps when a couple of businessmen, Bob Newhart types, asked me, "Who was that?" I said, "I don't know, but I was on my way to my plane and he grabbed me and asked me to go into the bathroom with him." They both screamed, "Oh my God," and ran in the opposite direction of where Andre was going. Andre used to like to have a few eye-openers in the morning. Well, in the afternoon and at night too. We were sitting in a bar on 47th Street in New York. Andre sat there and played cards while consuming 86 beers. One day, he had maybe 7 or 8 double or triple vodkas at the airport waiting to board a 7 a.m. flight. After finishing his usual, he got on the plane. Immediately, he started pulling up the armrest in first class to give himself more room. The flight attendant walked up and asked him, "Sir, can I get you anything?" "Yes. Screwdriver," Andre said. He finally pulled the armrest up and sat down. The flight attendant came back and handed him a screwdriver, an actual screwdriver, a Stanley screwdriver. Andre looked at the screwdriver and then at her and said, "What would you have brought me if I had said Bloody Mary?" I approached the flight attendant and took her into the galley. "This is something that might get you by in life," I said to her, imparting some words of wisdom. "A guy gets on the plane and it's 7 in the morning. He's got a plaid suit on. He's 7'4" and 550 pounds. He's got hair like the MGM lion. And he's drunk. Don't bring him tools." We went to the Marriott in Kansas City. At midnight, they had last call. The bartender came up to me and asked, "Is Andre here with you this time?" "No," I said. "Oh, thank God," the bartender said. "Last time he was here, I gave him last call and he didn't want to leave. I told him that I could only stay as long as he was drinking." Andre ordered 40 vodka tonics and sat and drank them until 4 in the morning. I met Rob Reiner at the Comedy Awards in Los Angeles after Andre died. He was the producer of The Princess Bride, a movie that Andre appeared in. I introduced myself to him. He said, "Boy, Andre was quite a guy." I said, "He certainly was." "Do you know what his bill was at the Hyatt in London the month we shot the movie with him?" "No." $40,000. And there wasn't one movie on the bill. He never left the bar. Women loved Andre. One night, he got romantic with a petite young lady in his hotel room. The problem was he didn't bother to close the curtain on his first-floor hotel room. Shikadan Al-Kasi and some other Arab gentlemen walked by and witnessed the whole event. There was Andre the Giant with his big mane of hair and the small young lady. I asked Adnan what it looked like. He said, "It looked like a lion raping a rabbit." Andre had his share of women. Flight attendants would approach us on the planes. "We have to ask you guys something." "About him." "Could we?" "I know what you're going to ask us." I'd say, "You're going to ask how big he is." "You don't know, do you?" I held my hands apart wide. "See, I told you," one stewardess would say to the other. One night, we were in a bar in Atlanta owned by Tim Woods, who wrestled as Mr. Wrestling. Andre saw this woman who was quite well endowed on top. He walked over to her and said, "Let me see them." The girl took her bra off under her shirt, gave it to him and said, "If you go across the street and put it on the horse, I'll show you." Across the street was a bar called the Crystal Club. On the roof of the bar was a wooden horse. Andre at 3 o'clock in the morning forced the cook out to the roof of the bar with a ladder. Andre climbed to the top of the horse and put the bra on it while the poor cook was holding the ladder. He climbed down the ladder and returned to the bar. The girl was long gone by then, but the horse across the street never looked better. WWF referee Tim White once said that Andre had no shame. He used to drive Andre's van to the arenas. I'd ride with him, and Arnold Scollin would play cards with him. We were in Glens Falls, New York, for a television taping. WWF television was always set up with every inch of the backstage area used. Andre couldn't find a place to play cards, so he moved his table to the other side of the curtain, which was the hallway where people would be coming in later. There he was, playing cribbage with Tito Santana. Around 7 o'clock, people started to walk down the hall and Andre was sitting there playing cards naked. And he actually finished the game. Andre never wore a coat. It could be the dead of winter. He would be wearing shoes with no socks, pants, and a shirt that was open. Sometimes he wore a sports coat, sometimes not. He would if he decided to take it off the car that night or it wasn't covering the pool. When he wasn't sitting around in the nude, Andre had a tendency to leave his shirt open in public. Once we were eating at a Chinese restaurant when the waitress ran up and yelled, "Button shirt. Button shirt." Andre ignored her. "Button shirt." Andre said to her, "If I can't show you my chest, then I will show you my ass." And he mooned the whole restaurant. Andre was sitting in a country and western bar with his shirt wide open. A little bouncer walked by and said, "Hey, you have to button your shirt." Andre said nothing and kept drinking. "I told you to button your shirt." Nothing. The manager walked up to him and said, "Sir, you have to button your shirt." The manager called the police. Barney showed up, all by himself. "Sir, you have to button your shirt." Andre said nothing. The cop actually called for backup. Several officers were now in the bar. The sergeant approached him and said, "You have to button your shirt." Andre said nothing. "Okay, stand up," the sergeant said, obviously ready to take Andre into custody. Andre stood up and never stopped. The cop watched him get out of that chair and kept watching and watching and watching, realizing how big Andre was. The sergeant turned to the other cops. "You know, it's hot in here." A Japanese wrestler named Kochika tried to break Andre's leg once just to see how tough he was. What a mentality this man had. He was 6'3" and about 260 pounds, facing a guy the size of Andre. I asked Andre, "What did you do to him, boss?" "Do you know how to put on a full Nelson?" he asked. Picture a full Nelson. One wrestler stands behind another wrestler. The first wrestler in back puts his hands in front of the second wrestler and then brings them up behind the neck of the second wrestler so that the first wrestler's arms are wrapped around the arms of the second wrestler. I said to Andre, "Yes." Then I stood in front of him. I was trying to picture Andre having this man in a full Nelson and then stepping in front of him with his hip. "What did you do then?" I asked. I fell forward. "What happened to him, boss?" Andre put his hand over his mouth, laughed, and yelled, "Coma." Japanese fans are funny. In America, if you run into the stands and attack the fans, you get sued. In Japan, you can chase them and throw chairs at them. Tiger Jeet Singh used to take his saber sword and slap people with it. Stan Hansen used to take his bullwhip with a cowbell and whip people with it. The fans would run like hell, and when you stopped chasing them, they'd sit back down like nothing happened. I managed Andre once in Japan. He was supposed to wrestle on the roof of a supermarket 5 stories up. They asked Andre not to chase the people because they thought the people might run off the roof. Andre said, "For $10,000, I won't chase them." The promoter came back and gave him 10 grand. After WrestleMania 3, I sold Andre to Ted DiBiase. The WWF wanted somebody to work with Andre as a tag team partner. I couldn't manage DiBiase because he had Virgil. It never made sense to me. I sold Andre, the only man who could win me a championship, but I kept the King Harley race. Go figure. A few years later, I wanted to get out of managing altogether because of my neck. It was a great career, and I had done nearly everything except manage a woman or wrestle a woman. That wasn't by choice. It just never came up. Bruiser didn't use them. Vern Gagne didn't use them either when I was in the AWA. I was managing Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig at the time I retired, and I sold him to Coach John Tolos. John was one of those old-timers hanging around and looking for a payday. I became a broadcast journalist, a term that Vince McMahon came up with. When I was doing color commentary while being a manager, it was very hard. I could never get the other guy over because I had to talk more about my man. I couldn't get the other heels over. If I managed Rick Rude, I couldn't talk about how good Ted DiBiase was because I had to put all my attention to my wrestler or I didn't consider myself a good manager. DiBiase is good, I'd say. He's got millions and millions of dollars in Swiss banks. But look at the body on Rick Rude. I know money buys everything, but Rude is at his peak right now. If I said nobody could beat DiBiase, that means my man couldn't beat him. Being just a commentator was easier. I could be middle of the road and still be the heel. It was an easy transition and no problem at all. It was something I wanted to do. In all reality, wrestling doesn't need a play-by-play guy. Most play-by-play guys came from radio, where you'd have to describe everything because no one was seeing it. You don't need to do what Tony Schiavone does. It was best when it was me and Mike Tenay and we would talk about the angle they were working, what would happen the next time the two wrestlers met, and what they were capable of doing. You don't need to call out moves, like clotheslines and Irish whips. Actually, I think I knew an Irish whip. Her name was Madeline, and she was from Connecticut. Jim Ross was always very prepared. The times I worked with him, he always had everything down, including football, baseball, and amateur wrestling stats. He's a very educated and well-prepared announcer. He's not well liked by a lot of guys because he was put into positions where he had to deal with contracts and other people's money that didn't belong to him. Randy Savage was great to work with too. He was very professional. If I had a territory, I would have Randy, his brother Lanny Poffo, and their father Angelo working for me. Because they'll always be there on time. They'll always care about the business and do what is right. They know what they should do and shouldn't do. They're businessmen. Lanny's heart was in the business because he is from a wrestling family, but he was in the shadow of Randy. That's the way things work sometimes. Jack Briscoe was more valuable than Jerry. Dory Funk Jr. was nothing like Terry. Lanny needed a gimmick, and he needed a manager. And even though he managed guys like Kurt Hennig and the Beverly Brothers, none of the guys wanted him around for the most part. They didn't look at him as a manager but as an underneath guy. Associating with him made them seem underneath. An underneath guy is someone who isn't in the main event, an undercard or mid-card wrestler. This was tremendous to work with on television. At the beginning, I was scared because I didn't like working with the boss. But Vince wasn't the kind of guy that ever yelled at you. If you screwed up, he would calmly tell you how you should do it. I was doing an interview once where I was making fun of Bruno Sammartino and how old he was. Vince walked by and bumped the camera. Uh-oh, he'd say. Retake. Most bosses in this business would yell, cut, goddammit, you can't say that. Not Vince. He pulled me aside and quietly said, Bruno really doesn't like it when you talk about his age and things like that. He was smooth. He never yelled. I went out there and did it the way he wanted it. I'm the kind of guy who could never play for Vince Lombardi. If you yell at me, I'll go home. If you compliment me and give me a pat on the back, I'll work harder. I'm not the kind of guy who is motivated by yelling. Vern was a yeller. That's why he didn't have any hair. He would knock it off his head with his hand. He'd never say, Jesus. He'd say, Jeez. He'd never say, Christ. He'd say, Cripes. He would get so mad. About a year after I retired, Vince approached me with an idea. He told me that Ric Flair was coming in and was going to eventually take the WWF title. He wanted me to manage Flair. From the first time he told me about it, I didn't want to do it. I was still hurting. I'd lost my heart for it. I used to like to take bumps at the end of matches and be brought in and thrown into the turnbuckles. I didn't love to work and it wasn't fun anymore. And my deal was that I wasn't going to manage anymore. But I knew that if I didn't do it, they would dump me over it. Flair told me that Hogan wanted to work and go on the road for 6 months with me. Flair came in with the WCW title belt, and we showed it on WWF television, but the attorneys got involved, so we had to stop. I agreed to manage him, but I only lasted 10 days. I just couldn't work anymore. It hurt so bad, I couldn't sleep at night. I never took pills or medication. I had beer, scotch, and wine to help. Flair would say, "You don't have to do anything, just stand there." I said, "I can't. I'm going to reach a point where I have to move. When my man is hit, I've got to sell it." The travel schedule was grueling as well. You work 10 days on, 4 days off, 10 on, 3 off, 4 on, 3 off, 10 on. That's the way it went all the time. But if you finish up in Seattle, 1 day is used up for travel. When you get home, you have laundry and bills, and you're counting the time. "I've got 28 more hours here," you'd say. You'd go to bed and the next day you'd get up and have to rush everything in one day. I have one day left, you'd say. I had to carry wrestling shoes, trunks, 3 sequin jackets, which weighed a ton, and pants and a shirt for Prime Time, a show I co-hosted with Gorilla Monsoon. I carried my manager's shoes, which were Reeboks, but everyone called them my weasel wedgies. Not to mention clothes to wear on the street. I had a lot of luggage to carry and I had to carry it on, because I needed it to arrive where I was going. Carrying all those bags, renting cars, and rushing to planes was really hard. My off days, I had to go to Baltimore and do Prime Time wrestling. Then there might be a personal appearance. Sometimes I didn't get a day off. Jim Neidhart worked 80 days in a row. I asked him, how many frequent flyer miles do you have? He said, how the hell do I know? I'm never home to answer the mail. The travel reminded me of one year I worked with the AWA. Once a month I would go finish up in Toronto on Sunday and fly to Chicago, and then 10 hours to Honolulu. I was off Monday night, and Tuesday I could go to the beach all day. On Wednesday night, I would work. Afterward, I would take planes from Honolulu to Los Angeles to Denver to Minneapolis to Winnipeg. I'd work Winnipeg Thursday night and get up at 6 o'clock the next morning to do TV interviews until 10 o'clock. I'd fly from there to Denver to work and then to Minneapolis the next day to tape the TV show, and then rush to the airport to catch a 5 o'clock flight to Chicago. From there we would rent a car and drive 70 miles to Rockford. We'd stay in Chicago that night, but the next morning we would drive 250 miles to Green Bay. I would then drive to Milwaukee to catch a plane back to Indianapolis. I managed Flair for a short period of time. I just didn't want to be on the road. This business is funny. When you want to do something, they won't let you do it. But when you don't want to do it, they make you do it. Curt Hennig replaced me as Flair's executive consultant. I was an influence on him, and he even wore a suit with Mr. Perfect embroidered on the back. Vince McMahon called it his Bobby Heenan starter kit. A few months later, in November of 1992, the Ultimate Warrior left the WWF. The WWF wanted to turn Curt babyface and team him with Randy Savage at Survivor Series against Flair and Razor Ramon, also known as Scott Hall. I told McMahon to have him turn on me on Prime Time Wrestling, which had become a roundtable show with me, Curt, McMahon, and other WWF wrestlers. I would say something bad to Curt, he'd grab me, and I'd start begging. He could dump some water on me, and I'd turn chicken shit. I suggested to McMahon that Flair go out first at the 1992 Royal Rumble and win it. He had him come out second and changed it to make it his own idea. Vince liked to do that. When Sean Waltman joined the WWF in 1993, I came up with his gimmick name of the 1-2-3 Kid. He was going to wrestle Scott Hall, and I suggested that Hall put him over. Scott didn't care, so he did. We were in the car going back to Connecticut with Vince, Pat Patterson, and James J. Dillon. Vince asked, what should we call him? We should call him the Lightning Kid. Can't do that, Vince said. There's already something with that name. Why not call him the 1-2-3 Kid? I suggested. He just got a 1-2-3. He actually liked that idea and used it. Flair was a natural from the beginning coming into the WWF. When he first started with Vern, he was the size of Dusty Rhodes and had brown hair. My first encounter with him, from what I was told, was when he was a fan. I punched him in the mouth one night outside of the Minneapolis auditorium. I don't remember that, but he told me the story much later. Flair got his breakdown in Charlotte, North Carolina, after a plane crash that almost ended his career. Just looking at him, you knew that they had to put the world title on him. Nobody had hair like him. Well, Hogan did, but he had only half of it. Sort of like a convertible with the top down. Flair always wore the nice clothes and the Rolex watches. He wouldn't mind ripping those clothes apart during interviews. Thousands of dollars it must have cost him, but I'm sure the Crockett's promoters in the Mid-Atlantic area and in the NWA compensated him for that. Flair had the colorful attire and the who. You could just see that he was the next Gorgeous George. The torch went to him. Flair came on the scene and he was never nervous. He always admired me and Ray Stevens, and I appreciate him for that. He always spoke highly of us, and I can only talk about Rick like that. He was a tremendous performer. He never laid on his ass. He never took a night off, and he went out there and took slams off the top rope for anyone just to get them over in a match. This is the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoyed this program. Please like and subscribe. Comments help the algorithm. See you next time.